All right, I think we can begin. So next week, there's no class yet. Next week is the Sunday after Thanksgiving. We don't meet. We resume in 2 weeks. This is always the same. Never changes. All right. All right, so we're in the middle of the story of Shimshon, and we'll see if maybe we can finish it today. The story of Shimshon, which is begins in chapter 13, 14, 15, and 16, okay? So the way it divides, actually, in terms of the chapters, basically, you have chapters 13, 14, and 15 is one unit, and chapter 16 is a separate unit. And they actually are parallel because the chapter 15 and chapter 16 end exactly the same way. Chapter 15 ends, and we'll go back to 15 in a minute. Chapter 15 talks about Shimshon crying out to God for help. And then the last verse of chapter 15 on page 553 in this translation, Vayishpot et Yisrael bimei plishtim esrim shana. So he says he judged Israel, whatever judging means. I don't see him in a court, nor was he living amongst the Jews. He lives with the Philistines his entire life. He judged Israel for the days of the Plishtim for 20, means he led Israel for 20 years. That's the end of chapter 15. At the end of chapter 16 is, after Shimshon dies, Vayerdu echa v'chol beit avihu, vayisu oto, vayalu, vayipru oto, bein tzara u'bein eshta'o, b'keva manoach aviv, v'hu shafat et Yisrael esrim shana. So we have exactly the same ending in both places, in 15 and 16. So the two stories very neatly divide. 15 is the first part of Shimshon's life. 16 is the second one. And the end of 15 and 16 are similar. The end of 15 is his near death and then his death in chapter 15. And of course, the end of chapter 16, maybe we'll get to it today or not, when Shimshon dies together with the Plishtim, Tamot Nafshi and Plishtim. And there he's also mentioned he judged Israel for 20 years. And there it talks about his burial. And he's buried in the grave of his father Manoach. We'll get to that later on. Let me start. Of course.
Okay, in Israel? With
Shimshon,
who lived with the Plishtim.
Yes.
How common can we assume that this might have been interliving in those days? Because he doesn't seem to have been criticized for it, at least before he, lived with the Lions. But
I think we can assume it probably. I don't think we have enough evidence, but I would assume it was fairly common. I mean, the Philistines are controlling. The Philistines are controlling the country. Was it for 40 years or something? Let's see, 40 years. When you're living in another place for 40 years, I mean, there's always discrimination. There's always, separate housing and all that other stuff. But at the end of the day, to some extent, there is intermingling, and particularly since, as we will see very soon, the leaders of Israel don't see the Philistines as anything other than their rulers. They run the country. You don't make trouble. We don't know. There's always discrimination. You have the story of Yosef. He's viceroy of Egypt, but he eats separately. So that always exists. But no, we don't really know. But I don't think we have to assume that it's that uncommon. But what is striking is that this is the one that God has chosen to lead Israel. And there's nothing about him in the story, and no sense whatsoever that he lives amongst the Israelites. On the contrary, he's living amongst the Philistines. His parents criticize him. He marries a Philistine woman, and story from beginning to end. And we'll see. Let's take a look, for example, in chapter 15. What?
What does it mean he judged?
Judge means he led. Doesn't mean the judges in the book of Judges aren't judges, except for Dvorah. Right. Military political leaders is the way I would say. Yes, Alan. But the what?
The 20 and the 20 ends up with 40.
Right, but I'm not sure that it's actually adding in this case. I think it's repeating. But 20 is significant anyway. It's after 40. 40 years is a generation. 40 years is a sense of completion. So maybe the 20, if we wanted to be do-race, what 20 signifies, perhaps it signifies that he begins the process of avenging Israel from the Philistines, but he doesn't finish the process. And the truth of the matter is, his mother was told that in the very beginning. Hu yachel Oshiat Yisrael miyad plishtim. He will begin to save Israel from the Philistines. He'll begin it, but he's not going to end it. And actually, since you made that point of the 20 years and pointing it out to us, I will add an additional point, which I think is very important. And that is that one of the name of this class, if anybody actually pays attention to the names, I have no idea, but is before there was a king. And the point of these sessions is I wanted to look at the book of Shoftim, and if we get to it, the book of Ruth, which I don't think we're going to get to this semester, but as sort of preliminary to kingship. Now, the question is, the book of Judges, the way we have it in our tradition, the book of Judges is followed by the book of Samuel. That's what we have it. In the Septuagint, it's not so. In the Septuagint, it has Judges, Ruth, and Samuel. It's clear that Ruth is written to be placed in between Shoftim and Shmuel, that's for sure. It's also 99% certain that the book of Ruth is much later. So it's also clear, I've spoken about this myself, and that there are all kinds of literary links between the beginning of Shmuel and the end of Shoftim. But I wanted to add an additional point to that, and that is, when you're studying the book of Shmuel, so the book of Shmuel is about kingship. The enemy of the Jewish people in the book of Shmuel are the Philistines. They're the enemy. They're Saul's enemy, Goliath. David fights the Philistines. The Philistines are the critical enemy and the main enemy, actually, in the book of Shmuel. And the Philistines in the book of Shmuel, this is a very important point, by the way, that people have not noticed. Very important point. That the writer of the book of Shmuel identifies the Philistines. Maybe they noticed it, but they didn't understand it. The writer of Sefer Shmuel identifies the Philistines, not just as Philistines, but the Philistines in the book of Samuel, it's a point of deep significance, are identified with the so-called giants, with the Rephaim. Not just Goliath, who's a giant, but actually at the end of the book, there's a set of 4 chapters which talks about different exploits of David, and there's a story about the 4 giants, the 4 Rephaim, who are born to the woman, the Rapha, and they're all Philistines. The Philistines. So the Philistines in the book of Shmuel are significant. A, they're the enemy of the Jewish people. B, they're not just the enemy of the Jewish people in terms of a particular nation, Philistines, but they represent something else. They represent the so-called Rephaim, the giants. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because in capturing the land of Canaan, so who actually possesses the land of Canaan? So the land of Canaan is possessed, A, by the Canaanites, the 7 nations, the 10 nations, whatever. Canaanites, the Amori, that's one group that lives in the land, and Israel is told they could dispossess them and take that land. But in point of fact, there's another group living in the land of Canaan that also has to be dispossessed, and they are the giants. For example, in the story of the spies, when the spies go in, they talk about not just Canaan and Amalek, they talk about the Nephilim, right? We saw the Nephilim in the place, and we were like grasshoppers, and they saw us as grasshoppers. So if you're going to conquer the land, actually, you're going to have to take possession, God's land. You take it away from not just the Canaanites. You take it away from these giants as well. Now, that's a point of extreme importance in the Bible. And the fact of the matter is that the one who actually completes the conquest of the land is, of course, David. Because what remains in the land is Jerusalem. But also, Jerusalem is all the battles of David are not just against the remnant of the Canaanites, but also against the Philistines. And my point is, in thinking about the book of Shoftim as preliminary to the book of Shmuel, we can't lose sight of the fact that Shimshon actually, right? Shimshon begins the fight against the Philistines. He doesn't end the fight against the Philistines. So the point is, if you think about the story of Shimshon as preliminary to the book of Shmuel, then it makes sense simply what David and Saul and David are doing is simply picking up where Shimshon leaves off. Shimshon begins the defeat of the Philistines, and Shaul and David complete it. And if you think about it this way, and this is what's important for us, that actually the way the book is structured, the way the book is Shoftim is structured, you have the judges, and Shimshon dies in chapter 16, and then chapter 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Those 5 chapters are a kind of separate unit, an epilogue to the book of Shoftim. So it is part of the book of Shoftim from one perspective. From the other perspective, when you're reading Shmuel as a continuation of chapter 21, but you're also reading Shmuel as a continuation of chapter 16, because Shimshon is the last judge. Now you have the beginning of Shmuel, you have Eli, you have Shmuel, who calls himself a judge, and then you have Shaul and you have David. So it's actually the 20 years is actually important then, because it underscores the fact he begins something, but he doesn't finish it. And the book of Shmuel then picks up where the book of Judges leaves off. That's a short version of what that's a very important point about the relationship of the books. Anyway, let's take a look at it's page 552. This is after Shimshon has killed many Philistines. Now, the first 2 times he kills the Philistines, he does so under the pretext of avenging some kind of personal affront that the Philistines have made against Shimshon because of the family. The first time he's upset that the people at the Sheva Brachos, as it were, are threatening his wife and getting the solution to the riddle. So he's very angry about that, and in order to pay them his debt of 30 coats, he goes and kills 30 Philistines. Then he comes back afterwards. Where's my beloved wife? Your beloved wife? I thought you hated her. I gave her over to somebody else. But I have a younger daughter, he says, right? I have a younger daughter, right? You can marry the younger daughter, right? She's even better than the older daughter. Shimshon says, I've had it with you people. That's it. I'm going to take vengeance against the Philistines. Then the Philistines come out, and after Shimshon leaves and does something, the Philistines say, "Who did this?" Oh, it was the son-in-law of the guy from Timnah. So they kill the guy from Timnah and his daughter, and then Shimshon says, "What? You killing my father-in-law and my ex-wife or whatever? Now I'm going to take vengeance." The point is that all the vengeance that he's taking has nothing to do with the Jews. Zero. I mean, it does in effect, but the fact of the matter is he's fighting the Jewish people's enemy. But the way it's represented in the story, it's all inside the Philistine world. It's inside his own personal world with the Philistines. That's how he fights. That's Shimshon's MO, and that's what we have in the story. Fine. So the Philistines are angry. Now in verse number 8, Shimshon kills the Philistines in verse number 8 of chapter 15. And then he goes to a place called Selah Etam, goes to a cave. Now let's pick up our story in Pasuk 10, in verse number 9, page 552. Vayalu Plishtim, Vayachanu Bihuda, Vayinachu Balechi. So the Philistines pitched their camp in Judah, and they spread out in a place called Lechi. Vayamru Ish Yehuda, Lama Alitem Aleinu. So the people of Yehuda say to the Plishtim, why have you risen up against us? I mean, I thought we were friends. Well, we get along just great. What's the problem? Vayomru le'asar et Shimshon alinu. No, nothing against you. We have come to le'asar, to bind up, to tie up Shimshon. La'asot lo kasher asalanu. To do to him what he did to us. That's an important expression. It appears later in the story. It's what Shimshon says. What do you want from me? I do to them what they do to me. So they talk the same language. It's not about you. It's not about Yehuda. It's about Shimshon. We have come le'asar, to tie him up. The word le'asar, to tie up, can mean to imprison. A beit, Joseph is put into the beit asurim, right? Asirei hamelech asurim, where the prisoners are bound up, are tied up. So the point is that we've come to tie him up, not about you, but we've come to get Shimshon. Vayedu shloshet alafim ish miyudah. 3,000 people of Judah come el seif Selah Etam. They come to the cave of the rock of Etam. Vayamru Shimshon. So probably they know where Shimshon is. Vayamru Shimshon. Halo yadato ki moshlim banu plishtim. Don't you know that the Philistines are ruling over us? Mazota sitolanu. What have you done to us? What are you making trouble for? Vayomer lahem kasher asuli kein asiti lahem. So he says exactly what the Philistines say. What do you want from me? I did to them what they did to me. So they all talk the same language. Vayomru lo, le'esarcha yaradnu. We've come to tie you up. L'titcha biyad plishtim, to hand you over to the Philistines. Vayomru lahem Shimshon, hishavu li pendiflun biyatem. I want you to swear to me that you yourselves will not harm me. Vayomru lo, le'mar lo, ki ason ne'esarcha, unetanucha biyadam v'amet lo nemitecha. No, we're not going to do that. We're just going to tie you up, hand you over. We're not going to kill you ourselves. They tie him up with 2 new ropes, and they bring him up from the rocks. Shimshon is now tied up. He's tied up by the Jews, and specifically by Yehuda. Last week we spoke about Yehuda, right? I mean, the first thing Shimshon does is he kills a lion. The lion in the Bible is a symbol of Judah, Gura Yehuda, and many other references to Yehuda. In short, here we have a story, Shimshon versus the Jews. Shimshon versus the leading tribe of the Jews. The book of Judges began by asking the question, who shall rise up against their enemies? What was the answer in the beginning of the book? Chapter 1, Yehuda Yaleh, the tribe of Judah shall ascend. Joshua did not leave any successor for whatever reason. So Yehuda, the tribe of Yehuda, is the leading tribe. So here the tribe of Yehuda is tying up Shimshon, who's fighting God's wars. And not only that, by the way, how many people do they send to get Shimshon? 3,000. They have 3,000 soldiers to catch this one guy. And the number 3,000 is an interesting number for our purposes. Why is it an interesting number? Because. No, that's true. But why is 3,000 here over here? Why is it interesting over here? How about this reason? Page 556. When Shimshon in the next chapter is imprisoned, he's imprisoned, right? He's tied up first and then imprisoned in the Philistine big house of the god of the Philistines, Dagon, and they blind him, and he has to play before them. They mock him. We'll get to that. And we're told in verse number 27. Yeah, 27. So he's there. They're on the roof. There were 3,000 Philistines looking at Shimshon. So the number 3,000 is actually whatever 3,000 represents, the big number, but it's the same number that the Jews sent to get Shimshon and to tie him up and to hand him over. And it's the same number of Philistines watching the degradation of Shimshon. That's hardly an accident. And we know in the next story with Delilah that she ties him up. So in other words, in long story short, the way the Jews operate vis-a-vis Shimshon and the way the Philistines operate vis-a-vis Shimshon is actually the same. Now, we could ask ourselves the question about, I just want to get to the Philistines. So the Jews are perfectly content with the Philistines. Don't make trouble with the Philistines, they're the rulers. So apparently, and we know they didn't cry out to God for help either, we know. But apparently, God is not happy with the Philistines. God dislikes the Philistines. Now, the question is, what is it about the Philistines that God actually dislikes? I mean, we can have a laundry list of things God may dislike about the Philistines. But there's something in particular I want to point out about the Plishtim, which appears in the story of Shimshon later. And it also appears in the book of Shmuel. And that is that the Philistines have a particular thing about taunting and mocking. Because you have over here, when they catch Shimshon, they don't just kill him, actually. They blind him, and they make him play before them. So it's a way of taunting the one that you've defeated to mock and to taunt. That's what you have in the story over here. I want us all to think about the story of Shimshon as preliminary to Sefer Shmuel. Let's forget about the last 5 chapters. I'm not suggesting the last 5 chapters don't belong where they belong. I'm not saying that. But from a certain narrative standpoint, the beginning of Shmuel picks up where Shimshon leaves off. He begins to destroy the Philistines, who Yachel, and then you have the book of Shmuel. So in the beginning of Sefer Shmuel, one of the first stories is Shiloh. The priests are running the country, and the priests are corrupt. The sons of Eli are corrupt, And then you have the story where Israel fights a war against the Philistines, chapter 4. They go out to fight the Philistines, and they lose the battle. They lose the battle, right? It's chapter 4 of Shmuel Aleph. And they say, why did we lose the battle? How come we lost the battle? Let's take out the ark of God. And this way we will certainly win the battle. That's chapter 4. So they carry out the ark of God into battle. And who's carrying the ark of God, no less? Chafni and Pinchas. Those two guys are carrying the ark. That's two scoundrels. That's in chapter 4. Let the ark of God come and save us from our enemies. And they send to Shiloh. They take out the ark. And the sons of Eli are carrying the ark of the covenant. Chafni and Pinchas in chapter 4, verse 4. In this translation, 579. So we all know what happens. What happens is Israel loses the battle. Chafni and Pinchas are killed. And the ark is captured. The ark is captured. Now, what was Israel's thinking about bringing the ark into battle is a very good question. What are they thinking? Why do they think that if we bring the ark into the battle, we're not going to lose? That's what they think. Is it the first time the ark was brought into battle? I don't know if it's the first time narratively the ark was brought into battle. The Chumash says, "Vayipin saw Aaron, Vayomer Moshe, Kuba Hashem v'yafutzu evecha." So bringing the ark into battle, per se, may not be problematic. But in this particular case, what they're saying is if we lost the first battle, if we bring the ark into battle, we will certainly win. Why would they certainly win? What are they thinking, actually? There's two possibilities, what they're thinking. It might scare them. Would the Philistines know? Maybe they do know. Maybe they don't know. Yeah, so one possibility is, who said that? Magic. Right, so one possibility is they think the ark has magical qualities. If you bring the ark into battle, then God's with you. Bring the ark, God is with you. God's with you, you're not going to lose. That's one possibility. And the other possibility, of course, is that it's not that they think the ark is magical, but they think something else. If you bring the ark into battle,
Finding favor, God told you to do.
Finding favor is one thing, that's possible, but I would go beyond that. Yeah? Yeah, but so what is that? Right, extorting God in what sense? Right.
He won't want the ark.
That's right. God will not, you're going to put God in the situation where God has no choice but to allow you to win. Because what's the alternative? The alternative is they're going to capture the ark and they will think they defeated God, which is what they actually think. So in other words, you're going to put God in a situation where God has no other choice. And that is a big mistake, actually, because God always has a choice. And the fact of the matter is that God chooses to lose. God chooses to impose exile on God. And my point is, then the Philistines take the ark. So what do the Philistines think? They've defeated God. And they put the ark of God inside the house of Dagon, which is the same place, actually, as Shimshon. In other words, it's the same mentality. Why did they put the ark in front of Dagon? To mock God, to show that our God is better than your God. Well, it doesn't work out too well for them, and we know the story. But what's even more interesting is the same theme at the end of the first book of Shmuel, when Shaul is in danger, he's going to die, he asks his assistant to kill him. He says, I don't want to, please kill me, he says, because if you don't kill me, the Philistines will capture me and they will mock me, right? So you see something about the Philistines, actually, a particular quality in all the stories, all three stories. They are people who are very into taunting and debasing the enemy. So that's one of the qualities that we have in the Shimshon story, in the Eli story, in the Shaul story. And the point of fact, I mean, we could give a long list of reasons that God hates the Philistines. But God hates the Philistines because the Philistines are Moshelim b'Yisrael. But God says, no. I'm the one that's Moshel. Whether they recognize it or not, that's a separate question. These are my people. I'm the king. And I don't want anybody else stepping into my territory. And that's the main reason. But in addition, one of the qualities of the Philistines is actually identical in all three stories. This is what they're about. But the Jews, not bothered by this. What are you making trouble for? The Philistines are the rulers. Don't make trouble. This is Yehuda talking. Yes?
All the rest are not the same culture, because all the rest live in the mountains inside the country, and the Philistines are living on the seashore. And
Yes.
they come upon, they have very high civilization, and they come apparently from the Greece islands.
That is possible,
So
right?
maybe that's why it was not quite God, because usually you assimilate to people who are higher than you, rather than who are lower than you. So to others, it's very difficult to look to them as enemy. But the Philistines, who are very high civilization, you tend more to agree and to assimilate.
Could be. I don't know the answer to that. It's certainly possible. I mean, in this particular story, we have the Philistines. The Philistines in general, by the way, in the Chumash, which we're reading the Parshios now in the Chumash, the Philistines in the Torah are a variation on actually Mitzrayim. The Torah connects them to Mitzrayim. The Philistines, Avimelech, is similar to Paro. He's different, but he's similar to Paro, taking the idea of taking the wives and all that business. And even in terms of the genealogies of the Philistines, there's a Mitzrayim connection over there. That's another story. Then even for our purposes, what is clear is that the Philistines are the great enemy, certainly in the book of Shmuel. They're the great enemy over here. But the Jews, the Yehudim, don't seem to be troubled by this. And they want to hand Shimshon over. And that's what they do. So this underscores this idea of the Nazir, the separate. He's separate from Yosef. When he's with his brothers, they throw him into the bar. When he's with the Egypt, they throw him into the bar, right? And basically Joseph he's tied up in Beit Asurim. Joseph is in Mitzrayim, is tied up by the Egyptians. So the parallel between Joseph with the brothers in chapter 37, throw him into the bar, and then chapter 39 and 40, when he's thrown into the bar, is very striking. And Shimshon is the same way. He's neither a Philistine nor is he a Jew in the real sense. In any event, they're not going to kill him themselves. They're going to hand him over. That's now. The brothers. Well, right. Initially, they're not going to. Initially, they want to kill him, and then Reuven says, "You can't kill him. Let's throw him into the pit, where he will die." But we're not actually killing him with our own hands. That's what Reuven says. Reuven's intentions is to save him. But what Reuven says to the brothers is, let's not kill him with our own hands. He makes that distinction of killing with your own hands, right? Al tishbechu dam, don't shed his blood yourselves. Throw him into the pit. He's thinking, when the time comes, I'll bring him out of the pit, bring him back to his father. Then Yehuda speaks up and says, no. He sees the caravan in the distance. He says, no, we are killing him. Yehuda doesn't make that distinction. Yehuda says, if we throw him in the pit and he dies, then we have killed him, in effect. Right? He has a different idea. Let's sell him. Not sell him that he'll be killed. Let's sell him as a slave or whatever. Let's get him out of our lives. He doesn't want him to die, actually. And when Reuven hears this, that they're going to sell him, he runs back to the pit. Because his intention was to bring him back to his father. But by the time he gets to the pit, someone else has already pulled him out of the pit and sold him. That's the simple pshat in the Chumash. In any event, but that's a separate issue. But in terms of the one who is, one might say, bound up by his own brothers, or threatened by his brothers, and threatened by the enemy, that's a Joseph story, and that's a Shimshon story. Both are called, Shimshon is a Nazir, Joseph is called a Nazir, and the many other parallels, as we have seen, riddles, dreams, and whatever. Yes, Micah.
Something being said here about Shimshon also. He's able to kill 3,000 people.
Right.
When he says,
I agree.
I think we're basically saying this guy is not out to kill the Jews.
Totally, I totally agree with that. Right. That's not his mission. His mission is not to hurt the Jews. He's not going to hurt the Jews. He won't kill a single Jew. He just wants to make sure they don't kill him. He's not allowed to fight the Jews. His mission is to fight God's enemies. God is displeased with Israel, but they're not God's enemies in the same way. The Philistines are God's enemies. Philistines are supplanting God. And that 100%, that's a very important point. Now, there's another interesting feature of Shimshon that appears towards the end of this chapter. Then we'll start with Delilah. Huba adlechi, uplishtim hariel ikrato, vatitzlach alav ruach Hashem, So the Spirit of God comes upon him. That expression appears 3 times with Shimshon. Vatiyena avotim asher zrotav kapishtim asher biru ba'esh. Vayimasu esurav mi'al yadav. We're told that the Spirit of God comes upon him, and the ropes on his arms became like flax that catches fire. The bonds melted off his hands. Vayimsa l'chi chamor triya vayishlach yado vayikachela vayachbo elef ish. Vayom Shimshon b'chi hachamor chamor chamoratayim b'chi hachamor hiketi elef ish. And he has a little riddle which he resolves himself. We talked about that last week. I want to make a different point over here about verse number 14 about Shimshon. First of all, his name is very interesting. His name is Shimshon. So we're not told why he's called Shimshon, actually. But what is striking about the name Shimshon is the word that appears inside Shimshon, which is Shemesh, the sun, which is the source of heat. And what's interesting is when you look at the Shimshon story, you see that fire and heat seem to play a very significant role. The verse over here is that when the Spirit of God comes upon him, that the bonds, the ropes, the 2 new ropes that are tying him up become like flax, pishtim. Maybe it's the play on pushtim and pishtim, I don't know. Pishtim, asher baru ba'esh, that were consumed by the fire. And earlier, you have also with the foxes, right? When Shimshon, after he gets so upset, supposedly, that they have, that the father-in-law offers the younger daughter to him. We talked about the older and the younger daughter in the context of 2 other stories. And when Shimshon gets very angry, he takes 300 foxes, and he takes torches, right? Lapidim. Lapidim means fire, right? Vayivar eish ba'lapidim. Verse number 5 of chapter 15, bottom of 551. He lit the torches. Vayishalach ba'komot plishtim. Vayivar migodish viad kama viad kerem zayit. Right? The fire, setting fire, and the Hebrew is Godish ad Kama ad Kerem Zayit. He set fire to stack grain, standard grain, vineyards, olive trees. It's interesting, by the way, that expression, he set fire to these various things, reminds me of a pasuk that we have in the Chumash, which talks about what happens if you light a fire. If you light a fire and someone else's field is burnt up, where's that verse? Kiseit Seyesh. Where's the pasuk? Kiseit Seyesh. Where's that pasuk? Where is it? Where is it? No, it's in Mishpatim. But where is it in Mishpatim? Where is it in Mishpatim? Here it is. I got it. It's page 160. Kiseit Seyesh umatzah kotzim v'nechal godish o akamba o hasadeh. The Torah says what happens if you light a fire in your own house and the fire goes out and it burns up someone else's field. Shalem yishalem hamavid. Then the one who lit the fire has to pay. It's one of the examples of damages. It's in the Mishnah. It's called Eish. The first Mishnah in Bava Kama. Eish, right? Hever. Shar bar mavev hever. And what's interesting, when the Torah spells out damaging with fire, it has the same expression. You light a fire and it consumed, right? It consumed v'nechal godish kama osadeh. Now over here, Shimshon lights the fire by Yivar mi godish ad kama ad kerem zayit, which I presume to be a field. The point is, it's pretty much the same thing. So he's basically he's a mazik with Eish in the first instance, and over here the ropes burn off his hands, right, like fire. In fact, and he's responding to the fact at one point where they burnt down. Right? So Shimshon is like this powerful force, which is the sun, basically. It's the sun. It's kind of a natural force. That's how he fights. And what's interesting about his army is also interesting, because he fights alone, actually. But he doesn't actually fight completely alone. He actually has an army. The only thing is his army is not human beings. He has an army. His army is animals, actually. He fights with Luchi Hamar, the jawbone of an ass. It's 300 foxes he sends through the field. So Shimshon actually is this natural force. I might call him the sun, actually. It's interesting, by the way, just as a small aside, about the Shemesh, that the Shemesh, actually, the sun, is obviously one of the main gods of the ancient world. The main god of Egypt is called Ra, which is the sun god. And we know that there's a goddess called Anat. We had it earlier in the book, we talked about it a bit, Shamgar ben Anat. And what's interesting is that when you look at this Shamgar, Anat is a powerful goddess. And what's interesting is she's identified with the sun. And what's interesting is that when it's in terms of the capture of the cities at the beginning of Shoftim, it singles out two places in particular, Beit Anat and Beit Shemesh. So you see already, actually, that there's something about Shimshon, not that he's a god. He's not a god, but he's God's child. His mother, as I pointed out, is Esheteo. And there's something about the story over here, something supernatural. And there's a connection. My point about Shimshon is, the main point I want to make is, there's a very, very, very deep connection between this very strange person and God. In fact, if you look at the book of Shoftim and you ask who is the most deeply connected to God, it's got to be Shimshon. And that reflects itself in the following very interesting phenomenon vis-a-vis Shimshon that we barely encounter in the book of Shoftim. It's a story that appears both at the end of chapter 15, which is our chapter, and also in the parallel in chapter 16, which is he's really the only person in the book of Judges who actually davens. He actually prays. He prays in chapter 15 that after he has defeated the enemy, he throws away the jawbone. And then in verse number 18, Vayitzma ma'od, he becomes extremely thirsty. Now, if you had the sun burning inside you, you might become thirsty too. You know what I mean? It's the flip side of the fire. Vayitzma ma'od, vayikra Hashem vayomar. He cries out to God. Ata natata biyad avdecha et hatshua hagdola hazot. V'ata amut batzama v'nafalti biyad arelim. And now he says, you allowed me to have this great victory over the enemy. But if I die, right, I will fall into the hands of the Arelim. The Philistines, for whatever reason, are called the uncircumcised ones. Leave that question on the side for now, but it is a very curious fact that in the Bible, Arelim typically refers to Philistines. In the story of Shimshon and in the story of Samuel. Say for Shmuel, Goliath, right? Right, Arelim. Here's the point. So he cries out to God. And if I fall into the hands, he presumes, if he falls into the hands of the Philistines, we know what's going to happen to him. What happens later? They're going to mock him, they're going to taunt him, they're going to torture him, whatever it's going to be. So he cries out to God for help. And God responds. God hollows out a space in the lechi. So God responds to his prayer. That's in chapter 15. And then in chapter 16, after he's captured by the Philistines, he again cries at the end of his life. They're mocking him, this and that. And 3,000 are watching, making fun of. And then he cries out to God again. Very end of the story, Vayikra Shimshon el Hashem vayomar Hashem Elokim. Very strange. Hashem Elokim. Zochreini no chazkeni no achapam az Elohim. Ino kamon kamachat mishtei inai miplishtim. Let me avenge myself one last time against the Philistines. And God responds. He gets his strength back, and he pulls down the building. He dies with the Philistines. He kills more in his death than he did in his lifetime. And then he's buried with his... So you have a very strange phenomenon with Shimshon. He's the closest to God. He cries out, he prays to God, he calls out to God, and both times he cries out, God is responding. So it's actually part of the same story. It's not someone you see him, you would expect this was very close to God. But there's a closeness, there's an incredible closeness, because actually he's God's creation in the most basic sense. And that connection is very, very striking. It's part, I think, of so it makes Shimshon very interesting and truly a tragic figure. I mean, and we'll get to the tragedy in a couple of minutes, the real tragedy of Shimshon. Yes? Well, he's clearly a mythological figure. I know what you mean by mythological figure. Did he really exist, you're asking?
He's not on the realistic register. It's more symbolic figure.
I think it's symbolic in the sense, look, if you're asking me the question, did this ever happen? Is it historically accurate? I figure you don't ask it. I know you don't ask it. It was a rhetorical question. And here's my answer to that question. I don't know if any of the stories happened. Forget Shimshon. It's actually irrelevant in my view. Who cares? It's not important whether the historians will tell us what happened. The Chumash is not a history book. You read one, forget this. Let's say Sefer Bereshit. Whatever happened may have happened, okay? I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying that the Chumash couldn't care less. You see in yesterday's Torah reading, it spends a lot of time, as the Medrash notes, telling us what the servant says. It's the longest chapter in the book about what the servant changes the story and negotiates this. And it spends virtually, and it skips over a million details about our heroes. We know very little about them. So obviously, the intention of the Chumash is not to tell us the life and times of Abraham, the son of Terach. The Chumash doesn't care about that. The Chumash is there to teach us. It's a teaching. So from that standpoint, and that's a very important point, it's not interested in, it has no interest in history, actually. Zero. It's teaching us. So I think that the question, when I read the Shimshon story, I don't ask, did he really exist or not? I'm not equipped to answer that question. I ask the question, what is the story telling us, actually? And what it's telling me, among other things, it tells us many things. But one of the things it says to me is that we've reached a point, if God has to go to this extreme, actually, to find somebody outside the community to fight God's battles, then we got a problem here. That's the point of the story, that there is absolutely this way, and I would add to this an additional point, that Shimshon not only bespeaks the nature of the Jewish community, it's so problematic, but it's hardly an accident that Shimshon dies, actually. His great victory against the enemy brings about his own death, which speaks to a different point about the book of Judges, which leads us right into the book of Shmuel, which is the judges have no continuity at all. The best example is Shimshon. Shimshon, of course, has no family at all. He has no family because he chooses to live with the Philistines. Can you find a nice Jewish girl? Well, the answer is that's not my job. That's not what I'm doing. I'm fighting the Philistines, and I live with the Philistines, and he dies with the Philistines. So the point is, when you read the Shimshon story, who's the last judge, actually, you say to yourself, this can't actually work. You can't run a country this way. You need some kind of stability, which is why the last 5 chapters have the same theme. In those days, people did whatever they wanted because there's no king. So the story of Shimshon cries out for a king. So my point in responding to Sarah is, yes, obviously he's a mythological figure in the sense that he's actually God's child. And he's not a Jew either, and he has this supernatural strength, truly supernatural strength, and his army are the animals. He interacts with the animals, with the lion, with the jawbone of the ass, with the foxes. He's coming from a different place. But I think the question we should be asking always is, what is the book telling us, actually? What is it trying? What's the message here? What's it trying to teach us? At the end of the day, it's trying to tell us something. That's what I always look for. What is it telling us? The story of Bereshit, if you want to ask questions about, did it really happen? I'll give you a question. I know you don't ask that question, but there's a story in Sefer Bereshit which is of supreme importance, chapter 14. All our prayers are based on that chapter. And that story, Abraham hears that his nephew Lot has been taken captive together with the whole town of Sodom. The whole town of Sodom is captured, right? So Abraham at that point, we know when he first meet him, he's 75 years old, right? This is already chapter 14. So we know in the next couple of chapters, he's already close to 100 years old. So he's more than 75 years old. And they've been captured by the 4 most powerful nations in the world, Babel, Elam, right? Who defeat the Rephaim and the Zuzim and the Amim. And Abraham is where he is. He's in Hebron, basically, right? And he gathers his 318 disciples, children, and he goes past Damascus. He travels from there past Damascus, north of Damascus, has a lightning raid on the 4 kings, and retrieves everybody. Let me ask you a question. As a historian, what are the chances that could possibly happen? The answer is 0, actually. Now, God can do anything, of course. But the story is so fantastic. But does anybody ever ask the question, how could it happen? I never asked that question. That's the story we're given. What is it? The Torah saying about Abraham? It doesn't matter. I mean, the historians will raise all kinds of questions. But the Chumash is not asking that question. The Chumash says, accept this is the story, we accept it. Whether it's historically accurate, that's a separate question. That's for historians. That's how I read the Chumash. I read the Chumash as it's a set of stories which are intended to instruct us. It's very simple. Whether it historically is accurate, I don't think the Bible in general is a great source of history. I hate to say it. For one thing, it's replete with contradictions all over the place. Anybody who learns Tanakh knows, and you can't avoid it. What you do with the contradictions is another story. Whatever. So that's my answer to your question. And I know you don't think it actually happened. It doesn't matter. My point is, maybe it did happen, but it's irrelevant. It's like the Zohar. The Zohar, I'm sure, believes every word of the Torah was dictated to Moshe at Sinai. That's not what the Zohar is about, in any manner, shape, or form. It's nothing to do with that. It's reading it from a different standpoint. Call it Jewish mythology, call whatever you want. It's a different book. It's that. Okay, let's get this. Alan? Yes.
Surveying the two chapters, does his character evolve?
Evolve. Does it well, however it evolves, I would say that there's a setback in the next chapter.
But
and
taken as a whole, does he become a morally better person? Or is that irrelevant to the story?
Well, I think he does tshuva in the next chapter. I think that, look, there's a poem, Samson Agonistes, you know what I mean? And the fact of the matter is, what does it mean to, Yirmiyahu is the same way. What does it mean to be chosen by God for a certain task, which means that you can actually have no human relationships? The Philistines are people that, as we spoke about this, people that Shimshon uses for his own purposes. What does it mean to live as a human being? And every person you see, you ask the question, how can I use that person for my benefit? Because that's what Shimshon is told to do. And that if you're using everybody, you can't actually love anybody. And the problem is in the next chapter, that's when he gets in trouble. He actually loves somebody. And when you love somebody, you accept your vulnerabilities and you accept plenty of other things, but he can't actually, he's not allowed to, because in the case of Shimshon, he can't be intimate with anybody. The only intimacy he has is with God. And the moment you're intimate with the enemy, and that's what he's told to live amongst the enemy, that's when he gets in trouble. That's when he doesn't lose his strength because his hair gets cut. The cutting of the hair is reflective of the deeper problem that we encounter in the very beginning. He can't give away the secrets. The secret is between, right? We all know this. Someone you're very close with, maybe you have secrets, you know what I mean? But you won't tell anybody else the secrets, depending who the person is, right? Maybe there's some things we keep to ourselves altogether, but that's the story of Shimshon. And in the next chapter, we can empathize with Shimshon. She tortures him basically. He can't take it. He says, okay, I'll tell you the truth. And once he tells her the truth, then that's when he gets in trouble. That's when they mock him, they taunt him, they beat him, they torture him. And at the end of his life, he cries out to God once again, one more time, right? He cries out to God one more time, save me this one time, which Israel has said earlier. And now Shimshon says the same thing, just one more time. Yes, Wendy, and then Shmuel there back.
Is that Shimshon was created to be a Nazir. Why was this Nazir important? Was it hair? So, no, I think it was the nature of the personality of Shimshon could never have existed with alcohol. What? Alcohol. He couldn't drink. He was not permitted to drink wine. Put
that's true.
Wine into that hot man.
Well, that's true.
He would have exploded, or the world around him would have exploded.
Look,
in all directions.
Let me say this. Okay, well, let me say, Wendy. Let me say this. That it's true, actually, and we saw this. That when he comes to the vineyard, he separates from his. But the truth of the matter is, listen, you don't have to convince me of the dangers of alcohol. I can talk about it a long time. The fact of the matter is that that's not the focus in the story. The focus is not the alcohol. The focus is the hair, actually. It's the hair from beginning. It's with no. Now it's true. You're right that the mother is told you can't drink wine because that is true. He says outside the vineyard. That's 100% right. And there are dangers. And you make an interesting point about maybe the reason that he can't have alcohol. It's a good question. Why is the Nazir not allowed to drink? I saw it more in social terms. Drinking is a social thing. And the Nazir is outside society. So the drinking is, right, all the prohibitions we have, Yayin Nesech and all the other business, it's all social. It's to keep your own identity. So the point is that probably has more to do with, but you may be right, there are other factors as well. Okay, let's now continue, okay? Now we get to Delilah. Okay, we're up to chapter, here we go. What time is it now? 40 minutes. 40 minutes for Delilah. Okay, here we go. Okay, let's start with chapter 16, verse number 4. So afterwards, he loved a woman in Nachal Sorek. Her name was Delilah. Nachal Sorek we talked about last week. Sorek appears in the blessings to Judah, in conjunction with wine, actually.
So let's say that's again Sorek is evidence about God's intention to beat back Judah being under the Philistines.
Could be. We put it more in terms of Judah versus Shimshon. Shimshon is, in effect, he's not the enemy of the Jews. He would never kill a Jew. But in point of fact, he brings benefit to the Jewish people, but his main obligation is not to the Jewish people. His obligation is to God. And God has an enemy with the Philistines, and when you defeat the Philistines, you help the Jews. But not that they want to be helped. Now, the name Delilah is a very interesting name. So first of all, what is the name Delilah? What? Yes? Why skip them? Because I want to get to Delilah. We can go back to it. We can get back to Asa. We can get back to that. But I want to get to Delilah now. Delilah is like. Now, first of all, I do believe that the word Delilah is significant, given the fact that his name is Shebesh. So right, his name is bright, is light, great light, and her name is darkness. I think that is true. But the names can have many different significances. The names can mean what their meaning is, the way they're written. Now, in terms of Delilah, it's like this. First of all, yes. So, Gitta, you mentioned Dal Yotav last week. So it just turns out, actually, because I'm teaching Yirmiyahu, and I'm also going to do it on 929, whatever. So I'll get to that. Dal means weak, that's true. But I want to say something else. That Dal Yotav, which means like branches, it is true that I think it's Yechezkel, it's in terms of a vine. But in Yirmiyahu, it's in terms of a zayat. It's true. In terms of a zayat. You must have checked it yourself too, right? Right, exactly. So came across it by accident. It's an olive tree. So I don't think, and it comes up also in, I believe in Mishnaic Hebrew, Hamadle. So it probably has to do with pressing down or lowering. It's probably related to the word dal. A dal is like a poor person or a low person. And I'm wondering even the word dalo, which we have, right? Dalo, to take water out of the well, which we read about, because you lower the bucket. I suspect that's to do with lowering. So Delilah probably is related to the word dal, which is low or basically weak. Now I came across something extremely interesting. I don't know what to make of this, actually. Because I was curious about the word dal. Dala. And it turns out, you say these things all the time, you never think about them. So in Shir Hashirim, there's a verse. So I don't know what I'm not saying Shir Hashirim is much later anyway, but I'm just wondering now about the verse in Shir Hashirim, which is this. Song of Songs. Where's Song of Songs? It's the first, here it is. Let's see if we find this. Chapter 7 of Shir Hashirim. Okay, chapter 7. In this translation, 1737, 1737. Every time I read Shir Hashirim, I wonder how we're reading this thing in the synagogue. But anyway, that's beside the point. Anyway, it's a rather erotic book. And it's like this. The verse is verse number 6. Roshech olayich ka-karmel. Your head, right, upon you is like Carmel, right? Carmel. Now the translation here, who knows? I don't know what they have here. The translations. It's a Carmel is, let's say, Carmel, right? Mountain. Now, Vidalat Roshech Ka'argaman. What does it mean, Dalat Roshech? Hair. Hair. So that's actually very interesting. That the legal, it appears one other place in the Bible, I believe in Yeshayahu, that Dalat actually refers to hair. Your head is like the Carmel, Dalat Roshech. And the next part is even more interesting, which is a complete accident. Melech Osur Bar Hatim. The king, Melech Osur, is held captive Bar Hatim. And what Hatim means is a very good question, meaning of Hebrew uncertain, which is certainly true. But the king is held captive. You know what it reminds me of, actually? Leonard Cohen's song, right? Hallelujah. Because what he does in Hallelujah, actually, he combines two different things. It's mostly about David and Bathsheba. But there's a line there about Shimshon. You tie me in the chair, right? Which is Shimshon. The next chapter, it's our chapter, actually. So Cohen, for whatever his reasons, has combined those two stories of the king who's tied down, who's, right? And the fact is that that's actually very interesting. If the legal refers to hair, I find that extremely interesting because at the end of the day, she's the one who gets him to cut his hair, or she will cut his hair. I don't know the answer, but I think the main point about Delilah probably is from the word dal, to weaken him. That her mission, which she's paid to do, is to weaken him, and she succeeds in doing this, and she's able to do it because of one key word over here, which is Vayehav Isha B'nachal Sorek, because he loves her. Unfortunately for him, he falls in love with the wrong person and gets in big trouble. And the chapter is about what? A masreik is a comb. That's right. That's another good point. A masreik is a comb in modern Hebrew. Yeah. What? No, I just said that. That's the king is held captive, right? So the point is, king is tied down. Melch asur. She ties him up. It's the same word. How can we weaken you if you tie me up? He says. We'll read it. If you tie me up. Yes.
Her mission was to weaken him in this manner. But every single time that he's fallen, every time that he stumbles and falls, this man is being sad. She doesn't do it, and she only mechanically cuts the hair, but we've just said several times over the last few weeks and today, the cutting of the hair is not his downfall. He has created the downfall by the loving.
Well, it starts with that, right?
The downfall by the intimacy that he's taking with other people, not God. I mean, his mission, single mission, should you choose to accept it, everything else dissolves, fight God's battle.
Well, he doesn't choose to accept it. He's not given the choice to accept it. That's a very good question. Who is a good question. Uriel didn't think you have a choice. That's true. Says so. Right.
But what I'm saying is that in this particular case, we automatically say she did this thing. The Philistines did this. The Judeans asked his permission, can we tie you up? He says yes. Here?
Well, they asked his permission with 3,000 soldiers. I mean, well, whatever. Look, here's the point. I'm not absolving him from and the story doesn't absolve him. He's not an innocent.
Then they are doing it to him. He's either allowing them to do it or he puts his foot right into it. So he himself has Vaye'ahav, and that's stronger than the scissors.
No, I understand that, but at the end of the day, the fact that he loves somebody doesn't necessarily mean she's going to try to destroy him. People fall in love all the time, and the fact is, hopefully, the other person is helpful. Eze Kenegdo, right? That's the idea of it, that people support each other. What?
You said earlier, yeah, he fell in love. He fell in love with the wrong person.
Wrong person, right.
Wasn't he supposed to not fall in love with anybody?
That's right. No, I agree. He can't. I agree with that. He can't. He has nothing to do with the Jews. And the answer is no. You can't fall in love with the presumption. I think is that the Philistine people are bad people. That's the assumption of the book. Maybe some tzaddik in there hanging out, but we've never seen any. Actually, we don't find any virtuous Philistines. The fact is, they're bad. The bad people, and they're God's enemy. God says straight up, God doesn't like them. So the idea of falling in love is a mistake. My point is, it may be a mistake, but it's a very human mistake. And I think there is a certain sympathy that one has in reading this. And the fact is, she says, what makes you strong? I'll tell you what it is, I'm a Nazir. He doesn't say that. He lies to us 3 consecutive times. But as we'll see, each time he lies, he gets closer to the truth. And finally, at the end, he says she's driving him crazy, basically. And he wants to die. It says he wants to die, actually. He can't take it anymore, right? But Tiksar Nafsho Lamut, in verse number 16, after she had nagged him and pressed him constantly, he was wearied to death. And finally he says, look, I can't take it anymore. This is the truth. And then she understands it is the truth. And she tells the Philistines who, okay, let's read through it now. All right. So the leaders of the Philistines, well, they're called usually Sranim. The Philistines consist of 5 major cities, and on top of each, there's a leader of the cities, they're often called Sranim, Seren. I think in modern Hebrew, a Seren is in the army, it's a particular, was it captains? I don't know what it is. It's a certain officer in the army is called the Seren. Vayomru patioto, seduce him. Uri b'meh kocho gadol uvamenuchalo. Vasarnuu lanoto. So they make it very clear. Why don't you find out, seduce him, coax him, find out his truth? We can tie him up la'anoto. Now la'anoto, inui is a negative word, means to torture him. So it's very clear from the beginning. She's no innocent over here. You want to capture him and you want to torture him because he's been killing so many of us. We will give you, we'll each give you 1,100 shekels of silver. 1,100, it's a lot of money. I don't know what each means. How many people we're talking about. There is a group of people always waiting outside the room to catch him. Now, by the way, the giving of the money for the purpose of destroying, catching Shimshon, 1,100, that number, which is a very strange number actually, appears in the next chapter. One of the interesting things, well, next time we meet, which is in 2 weeks, maybe we'll start with the next set of 5 chapters. I'd like to finish that. But there are 2 stories, beginning with chapter 17, 18, and it's 1 story, and 19, 20, 21 is 2 stories. How they relate to Shoftim, how they relate to Shmuel, it's very interesting. But the very next chapter begins, there was a man in Har Ephraim, his name was Micha. Vayomer li'imo, elef u'meya hakesef asher lukach lach, v'yato rit v'gam omat b'yoznai, hinei hakesef iti, ani lukachtiv. Vatomer li'imo, Baruch b'ni Hashem. No, it's a totally different story. But what I'm saying is that the book of Shoftim wants to link the last 5 chapters to the previous chapter. A man says to his mother, you know that money that was missing, Mom, that 1,100 money? I'm the one who took it. I want to return it to you. Blessed is my son to God. That's how the next chapter begins, the Peso Micha. In any event, here's the point. They're going to give him money, and we want to catch this guy and torture him. And now we have, over the course of many verses, the legal's attempt to find out the truth. So we'll see what Shimshon gives different answers. First, she says in verse number 6, so she says, let me ask you, she's very straightforward about it. From where does your strength come? And how could you be tied up to torture you? Right? And he's not, if someone asks me that question, I say, what? But that's, what? I'm out of here is right. But strange. Shimshon, I'll tell you the truth. The truth is, I don't have a psychological approach to the Chumash, but if one did have a psychological approach to the Chumash, I think you might say, this is, right, self-destructive. This is not, he does, yeah, that actually, he's not happy with his job. It's been imposed on this task is imposed upon him, which is very dangerous. He almost dies of thirst at the end of the previous chapter. And he spends his entire time figuring out pretexts to kill the people among whom he dwells. So one could, from a psychological standpoint, well understand why he might say, somebody, I've had enough with this. How can you be captured and torture you? I mean, what? But he actually answers her. I find that incredible. Of course, we recall that the Yasruni is what Yehuda does. We remember that the word asar, to tie up, right, to imprison or to tie up, is exactly the language that the people of Judah say to Shimshon. It's exactly parallel. It's a Joseph story, exactly parallel. How can he? So Shimshon says, "Im yasruni b'shiva yitarim lachi b'shaloch haravu, b'choliti v'yiti kachad ha'adam." So the first thing he says is, if they tie me up with 7 cords that are not dry, I will become ill. B'choliti, I'll become weak, and I'll be like a normal person. So she does this. They bring her the ropes. So she's in contact with the Philistines. She ties him up. And the party to ambush is sitting right outside the house, right outside the room. She screams, the Philistines are upon you. So the first is exactly what you had earlier, exactly the ropes and also the fire. The fire, right? Even the beginning of the fire, the fire breaks the ropes immediately, and his strength was not known. So we still don't know she doesn't know from where the strength, it wasn't known where this mysterious power comes from. You mocked me, she says to him. You speak lies to me. Please tell me how you can be bound up and tied up. It's different, he says. You want the ropes have to be ropes that were never used for anything else, that were dedicated for this purpose. Reminds us sort of like you read about with the paraduma, right? Right? The special, the dedicated for a particular sacred purpose. If you find something dedicated to the purpose, that's the paraduma. Can't have a blemish, and it can't have been used for anything else. You can't, has to be specifically dedicated for this purpose. From its inception, he says. From its inception, something dedicated from its inception to a purpose can undo my strength. He himself being dedicated from his inception, even before his inception, from his conception maybe. The point is, so that's the second. So already hinting at something special about Shimshon. He's hinting at it. He's not saying anything. But as the story unfolds, you get closer and closer to the truth. That I think is what's happening literarily in the stories over here. So of course she does exactly this, right? But then that doesn't work either. He unbinds himself in verse number 12. She says, you keep lying to me. What kind of relationship is this? She says, you know. Right. What a story. So now, so now he's getting close to the truth. Now he gets closer to the truth. I think when reading this thing, I mean, you can read it in different ways, but it strikes me as somebody, there is a need, people have a need to tell the truth, actually. You know, the one who recognized this very well was Freud. It's very deep, and Freud has a book called Jokes and Their Relationship to the Unconscious. It's a book I read more than once. So the book is a book of jokes, actually. And all the jokes, what we would say, are very Jewish jokes. They're all Jewish jokes. There are 2 kinds of jokes. There's one about the rich guy and the poor guy, the beggars, the Aniyim, that's one. And the other is about the Shadchan. And Freud has these jokes, I may have mentioned this particular, several of these, about the Shadchan. So the role of the Shadchan is to make a marriage. That's his job, is to sell. In order to do this, he has to sort of misrepresent. So for example, he has one where he takes the groom, supposed groom, to the house of the bride. Never met her, and he walks into the house. It's a very beautiful house, and you walk in. There's a break front at the beginning, all kinds of very beautiful Kiddush cups and stuff like that. So he turns to the He turns to the groom. He says, look at this. Look what they have. Look at the beauty here. Look at the beauty here. So the groom says to the guy, to the shadchan, it is very beautiful. How do I know it actually belongs to them? Maybe for the purpose they borrowed from their neighbors. So the shadchan says, are you kidding? Who would give these people anything? Right. So Freud explains the joke, you see. Here's what Freud says, which is very profound, I think, He says, the shadchan's role is to be a liar. That's his job, He's misrepresenting to make deals, a deal maker, right? And actually, the shadchan hates his job because he wants to tell the truth, but he can't tell the truth. But the moment he sees that it's not going anywhere, he's happy to heap on the abuse. And that's, I think, struck me, rather as a kid, it struck me as a very deep point about people. People actually want to tell the truth. But the circumstances of life often preclude us telling the truth. And what you have over here is Shimshon has a secret. And there's this woman whom he loves for worse, but doesn't matter. And he wants actually to confide in her. He wants to confide the truth. But he can't tell the truth because if he tells the truth, he's not intimate with God. But actually she keeps on pressuring him, accusing him, pressuring him. You're dishonest, you're mocking me, you're lying to me and everything. And as the story unfolds, he gets closer and closer to telling her the truth. And here it's actually getting very close, something with his hair. Now, what he says at this point is not the truth, but he's about to tell her the truth because he can't take it anymore. But that's, I think, the picture over here of Shimshon from a very human standpoint. I know, I find this from a human standpoint, a very powerful story about, yes, he's this, call it mythological, supernatural human being, but he's very human. That's the funny part of it. He's extremely human, maybe the most human in the whole book. So, of course, he says, here the Hebrew is difficult. Here they translate, if you weave 7 locks of my head into the web. She pinned it with a peg. Vatitkaba yoted. Vatomer elav plishtim alecha shimshon. Vayikatz mishnato. Vayisai to yoted or ereg v'yata masechet. He pulls out the peg, the loom, whatever the loom is doing there, and the web. In short, he hasn't told her the truth. Vatomer elav. Ech tomar avtich. How can you say you love me? You're not with me. If for 3 consecutive times you mock me, you don't tell me the truth. So she's constantly pressuring him, nagging him, pressing him. He was weary to death. He told her everything, his deepest secrets. Adami tells her the truth. My strength comes from my special status as a Nazir. Prior to my birth, I was born a Nazir, and if my hair is cut, if I break the vow of Nazirut, I will become like any person. Yes.
Why does the text not feel the need to account for the fact that it's so obvious that she's acting on behalf of the Christian and that she wants to get him killed? It doesn't deal with that at all.
It doesn't deal with that at all. That's true. I said that's what I was saying, that actually when we read it, we say to us, that's why I'm saying that in this particular case, you get the sense that he doesn't seem to care. He gets the sense that he feels himself connected to this other person, and she knows that it's at some point in time he's going to break down because that's what's very striking over here. And it spells it out in great length. It goes through all the 4 cases. First case, second case, third case, closer and closer to the truth, and finally he tells the truth. You want to say something?
In the last chapter, there's a parallel here, where when he's thirsty, he says, so he knows that he's one step away from falling in the hands of the Philistines. And here he's saying the same thing. I'm going to die, but he knows where he's going.
Right. No, I agree. We pointed this out earlier. The parallels between 15 and 16 are very striking. I think the question is a very good question. I think here, I personally shy away from these psychological interpretations, but over here, it's clear that he feels, again, I come back to that word, vayehav. And he loves her, and he, for whatever reason, feels committed to her. He has nobody else. Everybody else he uses. In this particular case, he tells the secret. And
he's not going to get the girl anyway.
of course not. But yeah.
I think all these things relate to another bigger issue, which is God has created or brought about this character who is singularly non-strategic. Or, I mean, this is not the way to win a war. But on another level, what you said earlier, who's his army? He's got no army.
Right.
And so maybe he's intuited the only way to defeat the Philistines is to be captured. Because it's not like he's going to surround them with an army. That's
right. That is a very interesting, I mean, I think what you're saying is extremely interesting. That's not the sense I get in reading the story. I mean, you actually could ask.
It's not in the story.
Right.
It seems to be.
Right.
But
it certainly works out that way at the end, that actually in his capture, you know what it reminds me of actually as we're talking? It reminds me of the story of Joseph. And the story of Joseph, actually, it's about what is Joseph's great break, actually? What does Joseph actually, the leap to where Joseph ends up, which is the viceroy of Egypt, where does he get his big break? He gets his break from jail, actually. He has the good fortune, jail. He has the good fortune to be put in jail by the guy he works for, Potiphar, who for whatever reason either doesn't believe his wife or does believe his wife, but still has a use for Joseph. And he puts him in this very special jail that's in his basement, in which the people, the high officials of government are placed there. And there he meets the butler and the baker, and he interprets their dreams. And that's what 2 years later gets him out of jail. It's a springboard to power. So you may think that it's a negative. You may think that going to jail was a terrible thing for Joseph. He doesn't want to go to jail, get me out of here. But at the end of the day, it's dafka being the beta asurim, being tied up in the jail, as it were, which actually is what allows him to fulfill his destiny. So from that standpoint, given the fact that the Joseph and Shimshon stories are so parallel, one can see that Joseph didn't choose to go to jail. He certainly didn't choose to go to jail. He doesn't want to go to jail. And he says, I'm an innocent guy. I was framed, you know? And the fact of the matter is, there's a certain innocence to Shimshon in the story over here, which is not earlier, you don't see the innocence. Earlier, he's using people. But in this case, there's something about this very, very unbelievably powerful person who's like a child over here. And in fact, you have it later on. Look at verse 19. After she realizes that he has told her the truth, she goes to the Philistines and she says, come now, he's told me the truth. Verse 19, Vatiyashneu al birkeha. She lulls him to sleep on her lap. There's something about that. It's very striking. That's the way you have a baby, basically. You hold the baby and you put the baby to sleep on your lap. There's something about this incredibly powerful man. Shy, exactly. Echoes of Sisera. There's something about the helplessness of this powerful person.
This is like a game, more than
A game from her standpoint. Right.
from both of their standpoints.
Yeah, but I don't know how conscious he is of this. That's my question. Because it doesn't sound like he really... Yeah.
In grammar school, I had a grammar school teacher who said that Shimshon was endowed with strength and therefore was not endowed with intelligence. And her interpretation, was that he was stupid, and that's why he felt threatened.
Oh, I don't know if that's true. I wouldn't assume that no strong people can be intelligent. I don't think that's I would say that's a stereotype. I don't know about that, but what I'm saying is that you have with Sisera also. There's something about this description over here of putting him to sleep on her lap, okay? And it's something about it which is very sense of innocence, a certain innocence to him over here. We're not seeing through this, or whatever the reason is. I don't really know the answer, but it strikes in terms of what Alan is saying, that the parallel to the Joseph story is true. That what allows Shimshon his greatest victory is a function of the fact that he ends up in jail. And then in jail, he cries out one last time to God, who responds to him. The difference is that for Shimshon, that's the end of the story. For Joseph, that catapults him to power. Yes, Andy.
I disagree with you on Joseph
Yeah.
I think Joseph's big break was his ability to say no. He was Potiphar to like.
No, of course. I mean, that's.
Otherwise,
No. Well.
And now Shimshon couldn't do it. Maybe Vinny Lamar was prettier than Potiphar.
No, I'm not suggesting that. No, I agree with that. I think that, well, they're different. I'm not saying that they're identical. And the story of Mrs. Potiphar is one of the great stories in the Joseph story. That's what gets him into jail. That's what gets him into jail. And that speaks well for his character. There's no doubt about that. But my point is that going to jail, which on the surface, because he asked the guy to, I'll say better. When he's in jail, okay, and he interprets the butler's dream. I'll say better. He says, listen, here's the answer to your dream. In 3 days, Pharaoh has a big birthday party. And you're going to be reprieved. And when Pharaoh gives you back your job in 3 days, do me a favor, he says. I gave you good news. Tell Pharaoh about my situation. Tell him there's an innocent guy in jail and get him out. And that's fine. 3 days later, there's a party. The other guy is killed. This guy's reprieved. And the last verse of that chapter, he did not just remember, he put him out of his mind. He forgot him completely. And the reader says, "Oy, what a terrible thing." But then you discover, no, it's a very good thing. Had he remembered him 3 days earlier, Joseph's somewhere in Egypt, who knows where Joseph is? But he doesn't remember him. But 2 years later, he remembers it when Pharaoh needs an interpreter. And that's what catapults him to power. So my point is, it's the staying in jail, actually. It's not being responded to. It's being betrayed by this guy, which is what allows Joseph to stand before Pharaoh to interpret the dreams and in short order become the viceroy of Egypt. That's my point. So it's, yes.
But to go back to Shimshon, it seems to me that he's given up. It's not that he's so stupid. He's just stuck and he's tired of fighting.
Right. It says, he can't take it anymore. Right. No, I agree. The question is he just can't take it anymore in terms of this woman nagging him to death? Or more broadly, the entire mission for him is something he really is not interested in. It's too difficult. Your entire life to be an instrument to kill God's enemies is not a pleasant way to live. And he can't take it anymore. He'd rather, whatever happens, happens. He can't take it. That's the question. I don't know. Yeah.
Why does God have an enemy? What's the story? What's this issue with God having an enemy? The other thing is this thing about God choosing certain people for certain missions and not giving them a choice.
Well, that's true. That's a fact. Okay. Here's the point.
Why choose him? Doesn't seem like a spiritual. I mean, what's special about him? That God would. What's in his neshama? What's special in his neshama that God would choose?
He's God's creation. That's my point. I'm not, something I don't know. Here's the point. One thing I never talk about is God, actually, because I know nothing about it. That's my theology. I know nothing about God. I have two pieces to my theology. I don't understand God's ways in this world. That's the first thing. And second of all, I don't believe anybody else does either. That's my theology. This is what we're given in the Bible. People have missions in this world, which God chooses. Jeremiah has a mission. It's extremely unpleasant mission, which he himself says on many occasions, I wish, he has to die at one point. He says, this is a terrible thing. But having said it's a terrible thing, he carries out his mission. He's faithful to the mission because that's Moshe Rabbeinu had a mission to take us out of Egypt and to teach us. And then Moshe says to God, let me cross over into the land. And God says to him, that's not your mission. Your mission has just come to a conclusion. Your mission is to find the next guy. That's not your mission. We are all mortals living in a world, and we have tasks. And the trick is to figure out what our task is. That's the trick. But the fact is, Shimshon has a mission, and Yirmiyah has a mission, and Moshe has a mission, and that's the way it is. It's God's world. We can't. That's the given in the Chumash. That's it. That's it. It's a task that we're given. We try to figure out what it is, how to do it best. And hopefully it can bring us, hopefully the mission is not, many missions are very pleasant missions, I think. But sometimes, and these two characters have missions, especially Yirmiyahu, I feel. It's sad, But that's his, I guess he lives, he understands that he's carrying out God's word. He has great ambivalences. He also defends the people on many occasions. They're different. I would great or worse. Yes. Shimshon is not a model. Well, first of all, Shimshon is not a model for us. Shimshon is sui generis. There's one Shimshon in the Bible. So we can't relate to Shimshon in any sense. Because we're not Nazirim. We're Jews, actually. Or whatever we are. We're not Shimshon. So Jeremiah is different. Jeremiah is a prophet. Jeremiah, yes, he was chosen for his birth. But he's a normal person in every other way. And Shimshon is not normal in any sense. Okay, how much time do we have left? 5 minutes. Yes. So I agree with your point. Yes. Yes, it is.
It's God's way to do it. So God here, gets him into a situation which sounds weird to us, but basically it gets him into the jail with the Plishtim, and then there he gets to destroy the Plishtim. So it may be God's way.
Maybe, but it's not represented as God's way. It's represented as Shimshon's mistake, actually.
Well, but I understand it.
But Alan's point is from a different perspective. In other words, Alan's point is Alan's point is this. I think it's Alan's point. Correct me if I'm wrong. Alan's point in Bigadol, the larger point is this. When you read the Torah, let's say you read the Torah about going down to Egypt. Okay, why do we go down to Egypt? And one answer is we go down to Egypt because the brothers can't get along. The brothers caused Joseph to be sold to Mitzrayim. Then Joseph brings the rest of the family down to Egypt. And we end up in Mitzrayim, in Golis, because of the inability of the family to get along with each other. And when you can't get along with your brother, you can't get along with the family, you end up in exile. And that's one way to read the story, that's for sure. But then you read another piece of Breshit, which says, God has a plan. Here's my plan. You're going to go into exile. You're going to suffer in exile. And the fact of the matter is, that's different. That doesn't sound like it's a function of our mistakes. That sounds like it's part of the divine plan. And my point is that that the Torah lends itself to these two radically different readings, and they're both true. They're both valid ways to read. So what Alan's point, I think, is when you read the story over here, he gets in trouble because this person that he loves, for whatever reason, nags him to death, accuses him of all kinds of things, of being dishonest, and finally he can't take it anymore. He just drives and he tells it the truth. That's how he ends up where he ends up. Alan's point is that's true. But if we want to look at it from another perspective and importing the Joseph story, because the Joseph story is about God's plan. God has a plan. We have to end up in Mitzrayim. That's God's plan. As Joseph himself recognizes at the end of his life that this is part of a divine plan, not just to sustain the family with food, but to cause the family to go into exile, was part of God's plan. So I'm not angry at you, he says, because we're all part of God's plan. And if you take that deep truth of the Bible and import it over here, you can say, you could read it, that what happens in the story over here is all part of God's plan, to position Shimshon in such a place where Shimshon can defeat more of God's enemies. That's what he's suggesting. And this, I think, is something to that. It's an interesting thing to think about. Okay, let me see, we got 2 minutes left. Okay, back there. Shmuel, and then Alan, and we'll, yes, quick.
Unlike a previous situation, he did not have God.
Right, but by the time
Consequence, this becomes the way in which he can begin to say he's the only one that's left.
Right, true. And by the time he wakes up from this, he's said right. He doesn't have God's help had to negotiate with this other human being. That's true. By the time he wakes up, his strength is gone from him. Not because of the hair, I think, but because he's betrayed the trust. Let me make one last point about betraying the trust, just to go back to the broader Shimshon story. And that is, we remember that in the beginning of the Shimshon story, there was a tremendous emphasis on not telling. Lo higid. He doesn't tell his parents. The angel, Mrs. Manoach, doesn't tell Manoach. But the angel doesn't tell Mrs. Manoach the name. So there's a big emphasis in the whole beginning of the story about keeping secrets. And I think that carries over through the entire story. It's something he's not allowed to tell the secret because he's intimate with God. You can't, certain things you don't tell anybody. Now in today's world with the internet, everything is public, you know what I mean? Which is highly problematic. But the idea of keeping a secret, that's something which is very important, is not to be publicized. It's about human dignity and etc. That is central to the story. This is God's secret. This is God's purpose. God has for Shimshon. So let me just let me just finish now because we have only 1 minute. Okay. So in short, in verse 19, I found striking. As the story of Yael with Sisera. So in verse 19, she's the one that actually cuts his hair. But he didn't recognize that God had left him. God had left him. That's the point. His power comes from Hashem, actually. He didn't recognize that in telling the secret, in confiding with the Philistines, God's enemy, that God has departed from Shimshon. So the Philistines captured him and they blind him, they cut out his eyes, they blind him, and they place him in jail in Gaza. So we'll stop at this point, and of course the next verse, but his hair begins to grow back. And I think for the next time we meet, which is in 2 weeks, so we'll finish the story of Shimshon and we'll begin the next story as well. I did want to address one thing about Shimshon, which is found in the Mishnah actually, and that is, how do we read Shimshon in general? So the Mishnah has a particular reading of Shimshon, with others have followed, and I wanted to suggest that that's one reading, but there's another way to read the Shimshon saga from beginning to end. So we'll finish next 2 weeks with the Shimshon, and then we will start with the last 5 chapters of the book, which are 2 stories, Pesel Micha and Pilegesh Bagiva. 2 pretty brutal stories, I would add, but that's the book of Judges and the call for kingship. Okay, so we'll stop then at this point. Next week.